Vermont Senate race. The incumbent, independent James Jeffords, is retiring. The challengers are independent Bernie Sanders, now in his 8th term as the at-large congressman, and Republican Richard Tarrant, the founder of a Vermont software company. Congressional Quarterly lists this race as Democrat favorite. This debate took place earlier this week at the University of Vermont Billings Center in Burlington. It's about an hour. Before we get to the debate, a look at some of the political ads that are being aired by the candidates.
Bernie Sanders. He's been endorsed by dozens of organizations and newspapers for his courage, integrity, and his effectiveness. But perhaps the Stowe reporter said it best. For his independence from corporate and political pressure, for aggressively standing behind what matters to most regular people, for standing up for what he believes rather than what he thinks he needs to do to get elected, we endorse Bernie Sanders for U.S. Senate. Bernie Sanders. In the fights that matter, he'll be on our side.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
Rich Tarrant has a plan to use his business experience and contacts to bring new businesses to Vermont to reduce our staggering property taxes. Rich is an innovative man of substance, a quietly charitable citizen, a team builder who will bring the two parties together so we can actually get things done.
I'm Rich Tarrant, and I approve this message.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Senate debate between independent candidate Bernie Sanders and the Republican nominee Rich Tarrant. Tonight's debate will last for 1 hour. Each candidate will get a minute-and-a-half opening and closing statement. We flipped a coin to determine the order. I'll be asking the questions tonight along with News Channel 5's Tom Halleck and our chief political correspondent, Stuart Ledbetter. We will alternate questions between the candidates. Each candidate will have 90 seconds, a minute and a half to answer the question. The opponent has a 30-second rebuttal. We begin with opening statements, and Mr. Sanders, we'll begin with you.
Well, thank you, and let me thank WPTZ for hosting this important discussion on some of the most important issues facing the state of Vermont and the United States of America. You know, we are a great nation, and we're all proud to be Americans, but as I go around the state of Vermont and talk to Vermonters, what I find is that people perceive very strongly that in our country today we are moving in the wrong direction in almost every area. Whether it is the shrinking of the middle class and the increase in poverty, whether it is 7 million more Americans losing their health insurance under President Bush, whether it is the war in Iraq, which we never should have gotten into and which we are terribly prepared to fight, whether it is tax breaks for billionaires and cutbacks for veterans, cutbacks for education, ignoring the needs of seniors and trying to privatize Social Security, people believe that something is wrong in this country. And I share that perception. Mr. Tarrant and I have many, many differences, but probably the single most significant difference is that he supported the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2000. He supported the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2004. He is one of the major contributors to the Republican Party in the state of Vermont. And in the last 6 years, what I have done is stood up to the disastrous policies of Bush-Cheney and the Republican leadership. And if elected to the Senate, I'm going to do everything I can to move this country in a different direction.
Mr. Sanders, thank you. Mr. Tarrant?
Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. You'll probably be surprised to hear me say that Mr. Sanders and I agree on some of the key issues facing this country. Issues like the struggling middle class, the need for health care reform, the widening gap between the rich and the poor. The difference is I have actionable plans for each and every one of these areas. Mr. Sanders has been talking about these areas in every election since 1990. Nothing has changed. I will make a difference. Now, I also disagree with Mr. Sanders when he votes against the Amber Alert and when he votes for the highest tax increase in the history of the United States, and when he continually calls for a reduction in our intelligence budget even after the First World Trade Center attack. See, I won't be soft on crime, and I won't be soft on terror, and I certainly won't increase taxes at every opportunity. I will, however, use my healthcare experience to get those costs under control. I will use my budgeting experience to help control the federal deficit. And I will use my business experience and contacts to bring new business to Vermont to help defray our staggering property taxes. Mr. Sanders likes to talk about blame, Tonight he will blame George Bush and the Republicans. He will blame corporate America, and he will blame the wealthy. But blame is about the past and finger pointing. Hope, on the other hand, is about the future and problem solving. Americans expect hope from their U.S. senators. I will bring hope to Washington.
Mr. Tarrant, thank you.
And a belief in the future of this great country.
Mr. Tarrant, thank you. Mr. Tarrant, the first question goes to you tonight. You've spent more money in this campaign than any candidate in Vermont history, much of it on advertising that many would characterize as negative. Do you have any regrets, and what do you say to those voters who are turned off by the tone of the campaign?
Well, this campaign is about getting information out and getting my opponent's record out. Those advertisements were about my opponent's record. He's one of 14 to vote against Amber Alert. He's one of 25 to vote for easy access for drug lords to the United States of America. He's one of 26 to vote against rape victims' rights to know whether the raper had HIV. That does not effectively represent Vermont's viewpoint. He also votes against sending condolences to families of troops in the Gulf War simply because of his disdain for George Bush Sr. He's one of 8 people to vote against that. That disdain, that kind of partisan hatred makes it impossible for Mr. Sanders to be effective. We have to work together in Washington, and that's what my campaign is about, getting his record on display.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders.
Well, you don't have to ask me. You can ask political scientists in Vermont. You can ask editorial writers. Now, here's a man who talks about partisan hatred. You want to do something about partisan hatred. And yet you have run the most negative, dishonest campaign in the history of the state of Vermont. That's not just me. That's what ordinary people perceive. And I think that we have got to change the tone of politics. To suggest that Bernie Sanders, who has been fighting for the rights of children for his entire political career, does not support Amber Alert and many other issues, is dead wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. The next question will come from Tom Hallett.
Mr. Sanders, this question is for you. Let me follow up on some of the ads that Mr. Tarrant was talking about in regards to your record. There's one that some people found disturbing and that most voters have probably seen by now. In it, a Burlington woman challenges your decision to vote against giving her the right to know if a man who raped her has HIV. Could you please explain your vote?
Sure, I voted for it. This vote that you're talking about was a political vote that came later. Does a woman who was raped, God forbid, have the right to know whether the rapist had HIV? Of course she does. The particular bill that I voted against would, among other things, say that that information would be made public. Do you think that's a good idea? I don't think that that's a good idea at all. So I have voted to make sure that any woman who is raped would have that information. There was another bill, very political bill, which was not a good bill.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Tarrant.
First of all, that information is not public. Mr. Sanders, you should know the HIPAA regulations that apply to medical information. It's not public. You have to keep that information quiet. There's plenty of laws that say that. So that's just not true. The bill he talks about is a bill that he was responsible for or tried to get through that allowed the rape victim to get a court order to find out whether the attacker had HIV. Can you imagine a rape victim having to go to court and get a court order? That doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Mr. Tarrant. The next question comes from Stuart Ledbetter.
Stephanie, thanks. Mr. Tarrant, as you know, many Americans seem to be fascinated to varying degrees when they read about people who have a lot of money. The question for you is, how does a guy like you, who's worth a couple of $100 million, perhaps more, understand the fears and represent the concerns of an ordinary family living in a mobile home park?
Sure. I grew up first-generation American, and my father would turn over in the grave if he heard what you just said. I've been very fortunate. I came to Vermont on a scholarship to go to St. Michael's College. I didn't have a dime. We never had any money as kids. I got a scholarship. I got out of college. I was able to start IDX on a shoestring with 3 young children, taking a huge chance. My partner and I each had 7 kids at the time. We had virtually no money, no customers, and no product. And we left a good job at IBM to take a chance. As a result, we created thousands and thousands of jobs. We became the largest privately held or publicly held company in the history of the state of Vermont in terms of being homegrown. We sacrificed every point along the way, not knowing early on whether we could even feed our kids and pay our bills. We struggled. I understand what it takes to struggle. What a struggle is, believe me, we grew up that way, and you don't lose your values. The way you grow up is the way your values are etched in you. I totally understand what it means to struggle.
Mr. Stewart, the issue is not that Mr. Tarrant is worth a whole lot of money. The issue is the policies that he believes in. And like the Republican leadership in Washington, Mr. Tarrant thinks, hey, it's a good idea to give hundreds of billions of dollars of tax breaks to the wealthiest 1%, while property taxes in the state of Vermont soar because we're not adequately funding special education. Mr. Tarrant thinks it's okay that we give tax breaks to people who don't need it, while veterans are on waiting lines in the state of Vermont and all over this country. So the issue is not that he has a lot of money.
Mr. Sanders, thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is for you. You have an ad that says, I don't want to see kids have a lower standard of living than their parents.
Right.
As a senator, what legislation would you sponsor to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, that's good. I mean, Stephanie, the issue here is that if Mr. Tarrant's trickle-down economic theories continue, which includes outsourcing millions of good-paying jobs, having a president in Washington who actually believes we shouldn't raise the national minimum wage above $5.15 an hour, seeing more and more people lose their health insurance while Bush and Cheney and the Republican leadership cut back on Medicare and Medicaid. You add all of those things together, and the fact that college education is soaring, middle-class families can't afford to send it, the end result is that for the first time in the modern history of America, if we do not change these policies, if we say no to corporate America outsourcing our jobs, if we say yes to a national health care program which guarantees health care to all people, if we say yes that every kid in this country is going to get college education regardless of his or her income, that is the way that we can begin to turn the economy around so that our kids, for the first time in our lifetimes, the modern history of America, do not have a lower standard of living than we do.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Tarrant?
I virtually agree with most of what he said. The difference is he keeps saying it. 16 years, keeps saying it. I have a plan to fix health care, a real plan based on my 35 years experience. I have a plan to fix the tuition problem, which is a big problem for the middle class and for the next generation. And I have a plan and an actionable plan to take care of property taxes and to do something about our staggering property taxes. I have real plans for all three of those. 16 years, he keeps saying the same thing.
Tom, the next question, please.
Thanks, Tim. Mr. Tarrant, let's talk about the Iraq War for a moment. For more than a year, you've called for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from harm's way in Iraq, predicting civil war there. On Iraq, it seems you are closer to Mr. Sanders' position than you are to many Republicans, including President Bush. Is that fair to say?
Well, I've been saying, Tom, you're right, for over a year that civil war was inevitable, and it just takes a little bit of history reading to realize that. Not a popular position to take with the Republican Party back then. I think I've been proved correct. I know I've been proved correct. Our troops have done a fabulous job. I mean, they deposed the dictator. They had free elections. They have a government. It's not the best government, but I've been saying, and I still say, it's time to redeploy our troops out of harm's way. But you know what? We gave them the freedom to have a civil war. And that sounds convoluted, but we would never have had a civil war in this country if we didn't get free from Great Britain. So, like New Hampshire says, live free or die means something.
Mr. Sanders?
Tom, I'm glad that Mr. Tarrant thinks that we should bring our troops home, but I think today, I mean, certainly the last time I debated, when he was asked how he would have voted on the war in Iraq, he said, gee, I don't know, I didn't have enough information. Well, I got to tell you something. I voted against the war in Iraq, as did Senator Leahy, Senator Jeffords. 98% of Vermonters who called my office said, do not give the President of the United States the authority to go to war. That, in fact, was the right vote. Maybe Mr. Tarrant at some point will tell us how he might have voted.
Stuart, the next question.
Well, Congressman, in an earlier debate, you said you'd like U.S. troops out of Iraq within a year. Why a year? How'd you choose that day? Doesn't that telegraph to insurgents to stick it out for that period of time?
I don't think the insurgents need any telegraphing, unfortunately and tragically. This month we're going to lose more soldiers in Iraq than we have for several years. The fact of the matter is we should never have gone into Iraq in the first place. The president, in my view, misled us. Second of all, under Rumsfeld, we were totally unprepared for the insurgency that took place. And third of all, you have a president of the United States. You know what he says today? Our soldiers are dying. Tens of thousands of Iraqis have been killed. We're spending $300 billion. And the president's answer is, stay the course. More next year, 5 years, 10 years. How many years are we going to be there? I don't think we can bring our troops home tomorrow. But I think what the president has got to do is go to the military and say, gentlemen, give me a plan so that the vast majority of our troops are going to be out of Iraq. Some of them can be deployed in Kuwait, somewhere in the Middle East. They've got to come home. The situation there is abysmal. And what we're seeing now is that a strong majority of the people of Iraq themselves, in the midst of all of the violence, you know what they say, Stuart? They say we would be safer, more stable if the American troops went home. I think we should respect their wishes. I think we should bring our troops home.
Mr. Sanders, thank you.
Thank you.
30-second response.
Yeah, I did not have access to the intelligence information that the others had, so of course I could not tell how I would vote. Clearly, in hindsight, it was a mistake, but I will tell you this. If I did have access to that intelligence and I read it in a way that would say we shouldn't go to war, you can bet I would have a better chance of convincing the president than Mr. Sanders would.
Mr. Tarrant, the next question is for you. Do you believe North Korea and Iran have become true threats and dangers to our national security? And if so, what would you do about it?
Yeah, both Iran and North Korea have very dangerous leaders. Kim Jong-il is an evil man. But I am for more diplomacy. I think there's plenty of time left. Working with other regional powers in the area, I would be one to offer diplomatic recognition, a lifting of our stated policy for regime change, and a giving up of economic sanctions. See, I don't believe economic sanctions work. They hurt the people. They never hurt the rulers. My belief, and it's the same with Iran, I think we still have 3 to 5 years with Iran in terms of the same kind of diplomatic approach. I believe that in the long haul, the American economic engine is a lot more powerful than the American military engine. And I would look for incentives and economic help and trade. I believe world trade fosters world peace. And those are the kinds of things we need to think more about as we interact with hotspots around the world.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
One of the real weaknesses of our foreign policy is that we are spending so much time and energy in Iraq that we have ignored the very serious problems in North Korea, in Iran, and in the Middle East. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that recently, China is beginning to step up to the plate, and China is now telling North Korea that if you want to continue to get the 80% of your oil imports, which come from China, at a discounted price, you're going to have to start talking about stopping your nuclear weapons program. So I think we've got to work with the countries in Asia and with China to continue that process.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Tom?
Mr. Sanders, talking about oil, you predicted during a debate the other night that oil prices would continue to fall through the election and then likely rise again soon after it. Is this a conspiracy then? And are you saying the president and his friends are rigging the price of gasoline?
Well, how am I doing so far? Since I made that statement, oil prices continue to go down. Clearly, I think the Republicans understand that if you look at what's going on in America, whether it is the healthcare disintegration of our system, whether it's the war in Iraq, the shrinking middle class, the needs of our veterans, kids can't go into college, they got a lot of problems. And high oil prices was certainly one of their prices. Do I believe that the President of the United States and the oil industry together are able to flood the market with cheaper oil? Of course I do. Do I think that after the election you're going to see oil prices going up? Sure, you do. One of the outrages that has taken place in this country in the last several years is that while Americans were paying over $3 a gallon, ExxonMobil and the other oil companies were enjoying record-breaking profits. ExxonMobil made $36 billion last year, and I had enough money, by the way, to give their former CEO a $398 million retirement package. Clearly, some of us in Congress have got to, and are trying to stand up to the oil industry and tell them to stop ripping off the American people.
Thank you. Response?
I find that a fascinating answer. Mr. Sanders, several years ago, you advocated for releasing oil from the strategic reserve because, and you said, supply and demand will work. To quote your words, it's economics 101.
Thank you. The next question comes from Stuart.
Mr. Tarrant, let's talk about tax policy for a minute. Are you willing to make a promise tonight to the voters of this state in terms of holding the line on federal taxes were you to be elected to the Senate?
Yeah, I want to do whatever I can to keep taxes down. I firmly believe that the problem we have in Washington is spending. Now, I think some of the tax initiatives are problematic. We have to recognize, though, that for the last 2 years, we've had the largest tax collection increase in the history of the United States. At a period in time where lower and middle class workers paid less tax, 243,000 Vermonters paid less tax, our tax revenues have skyrocketed to the tune of more than $500 billion over 2 years. But the real problem we have is spending in Washington. We have to get our spending under control. We have too many big spenders in Washington, both parties. Both parties are spending us like crazy. Mr. Sanders is one of the top and rated the top #1 spender in the United States Congress. We need people in Washington who understand the value of a dollar and understand that you cannot spend what you do not have. We need to keep taxes down, and we need to keep spending down even more importantly.
Mr. Sanders?
I'll tell you a little bit about the Bush-Cheney administration that Mr. Tarrant has supported. A couple of months ago, on the floor of the House, I voted against the bill. You know what that bill would have done? It would have given, over a 10-year period, $700 billion in tax breaks to whom? To the wealthiest 0.2%. Since Bush has been president, we've had 3 record-breaking deficits. The national debt has gone up by several trillion dollars. The problem is both tax breaks for billionaires and millionaires who don't need it, as well as absurd spending policies.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Staying on this topic, President Bush proposed and Congress approved large tax cuts during his time in office. Are there any of these tax cuts that you would keep?
Sure, absolutely. Middle class is hurting. People can't afford to send their kids to college. We need targeted tax breaks for families that want help to send their kids to college. Try to find good, affordable child care in the state of Vermont or in many places in America. You can't. We should target tax breaks for child care. We should target tax breaks to make it easier for people to buy hybrid vehicles and move towards sustainable energy as we break our dependence on Mideast oil and fossil fuels. Yes, tax breaks for the middle class, tax breaks for working families, yes. Tax breaks for billionaires, not this, Senator.
Thank you. Your response?
Well, Mr. Sanders, that bill you talked about, well, I think that was the bill that you voted against that included raising the minimum wage, including tax credits for tuition payment for middle-class workers, and included tax credits for teachers who use their own money to pay expenses for students who could not afford to pay for their own expenses. Those 3 things were in that bill that you voted against because the estate tax would have a benefit to the very wealthy. So I think I remember that vote, Mr. Sanders.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tarrant. Mr. Sanders, would you like to answer to that?
Sure, Mr. Tarrant is absolutely right. That is what the Republican leadership does. They provide $700 billion in tax breaks for the wealthiest 0.2%, and then they say we're going to do some good things. Mr. Tarrant, what they should have done is given us a separate bill so that we could have, in fact, voted for targeted tax breaks for the middle class.
Mr. Tarrant? Yes, please.
That is true. And if we could have straight up or straight down bills, that would be fabulous. But we always have to make choices. You chose to hurt the wealthy and as a byproduct hurt those who needed it instead of help those needed and as a byproduct help the wealthy.
Okay.
It's a good discussion. Stephanie,
no, we're actually going to take a 2-minute break at this point. We have plenty more questions for the candidates when we return. Welcome back to the Vermont U.S. Senate debate. We'll get right back to the questions now. The next question comes from Tom Halleck.
Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Tarrant, on abortion rights, will you, under all circumstances, reject the Supreme Court nominee who comes before you who would threaten to reverse Roe versus Wade?
Well, first of all, Roe Wade is the law of the land, and I respect the law of the land. The fact of the matter is, I do not believe in litmus tests for judges. I believe judges should be hired just like any other profession, whether it's at IDX or WPTZ. What is their background? What are the credentials, character, capability, knowledge, professionalism, all of those kinds of things are important for any job. And that's how we should be judging judges as to whether they're capable, and not be trying to get into their head and try to figure out whether this person believes what I believe or whether this person doesn't believe what I believe. I think that's not what our forefathers intended. We should not have litmus tests for judges.
Mr. Sanders?
You know, it's funny, Mr. Tarrant has been running for the Senate for probably over a year now, and he hasn't told us his position on abortion rights. You know, I have a lot of friends. I am pro-choice. That's the fact. Everybody knows that. I have a lot of friends who disagree with me, and I respect that. But Mr. Tarrant hasn't really given an answer. We know that his private foundation prevented funding for groups that were pro-choice. I think he made a personal donation to an a group that was against abortion. But you haven't really come out and said it. So to answer your question, I will say it. I respect the other side's point of view. I am pro-choice.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I respect Roe Wade. It is the law of the land. Mr. Sanders, if you want to talk about my foundation gives away millions and millions of dollars to Vermonters every year. You are a very wealthy man. You earn over $250,000 a year. I would like you to reveal what charities you give to and how much. Will you do that?
I'll tell you what we'll do. Absolutely. Are you prepared to release your taxes, which will include your charitable donations? We'll do it. My wife and I do actually earn good living. And last year, if my memory is correct, we contributed, I think, about 5% of our income to charity. But anytime you want to release your taxes, Mr. Tarrant, which you originally said that you would, but I believe changed your mind, which includes charitable donations, we're happy to do that. But he still hasn't answered the question about choice.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. The next question is from Stuart Ledbetter.
Mr. Sanders, do you think that gay people ought to have the right to get married outside of Massachusetts, be able to file joint federal income taxes and so forth? If you do, would you sponsor legislation to that effect? And part two, would you tell us if you think it's time to repeal the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Yeah, I'm not a great fan, part of the second part of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. God only knows that we have had gay soldiers forever, World War II, Vietnam, today, putting their lives on the line, and they deserve to be treated the same as other soldiers. I was a strong supporter of civil unions. I believe that. I voted against the DOMA bill. I believe that the federal government should not be involved in overturning Massachusetts or any other state, because I think, Stuart, the whole issue of marriage is a state issue. That's what it is. So that is my view on that.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Tarrant.
Yeah, I believe marriages between a man and a woman, the civil unions in this state as they exist are fine. I think they should be expanded, however, or a different set of laws be laid out for others who want a professional partnership, like a brother and a sister. I know an elderly brother and sister that have lived together for many years, and they don't have the same benefits that married couples have or civil union. And they talk about that, and so I'm not sure it's totally fair, but that's my feeling on the subject matter. And Mr. Sanders, as it relates to my tax returns, I will gladly turn over my foundation.
Mr. Tarrant,
that wasn't the question, Mr. Tarrant.
The information.
That wasn't the question. Will you turn over your tax returns? Personal.
Gentlemen. Mr. Tarrant, you favor universal health care and have made it a focus of your campaign. Your plan, though, comes with quite the price tag. How would you pay for this? Where's the money going to come from?
Sure. I believe every American should be covered by health insurance. And I would do that by expanding Medicare, because Medicare, even though a bureaucracy, is a very efficient bureaucracy. And I would expand it, leave the over 65 piece as is, under 65, paying a premium according to your means. But we need to get everybody covered, because coverage impacts behavior. Second thing I want to do is reduce the restrictions on private companies so Vermonters can buy policies from out-of-state companies that better fit their needs. But having said all that, the real issue is the underlying cost. Premiums reflect the cost. And if you look at the cost, you find that 10% of the population is responsible for 70% of the cost. So and they're the diabetics, they're the hypertensives, the chronic heart failure, asthma. My plan has a zeroing in on those 10% and early detection, which is why insurance is important, early detection and management of those diseases. We can cut $500 billion out of our healthcare system per year with my plan. We can make it more efficient. We've got the best doctors, the best hospitals, and the best nurses in the world, but logistically, we don't get the right patient to the right doctor at the right time with the right information. My plan addresses that. It's very, very distinct and very, very specific. We can do this.
Thank you, Mr. Tarrant. Mr. Sanders.
I'm very proud that as Vermont's congressman, I have led the effort against the pharmaceutical industry's policies of charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and as a result of that, a lot of people in Vermont and America are paying less for their prescription drugs. I'm proud that we've established 3 federally qualified health centers in the state now providing primary health care and dental care, very important issue, low-cost prescription drugs to many thousands of Vermonters. In terms of Mr. Tarrant's expertise on health care, I would remind folks that Mr. Tarrant has never cast a vote. He's never had a public position.
Mr. Sanders.
We'll get to this one later.
Tom.
We'll let you keep going because the next question is for you, Mr. Sanders. How different are your ideas for achieving universal health insurance coverage? And speaking of the pharmaceutical industry, should the government control the price of prescription drugs?
Well, let me continue my thread. Mr. Tarrant had one position on health care in the state of Vermont. He was on the board of directors of Fletcher Allen. And under his tutelage, sitting on 2 important committees, Fletcher Allen underwent the largest scandal in the history of the state of Vermont, costing ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And Mr. Tarrant and other members of the board were asked to resign. And then incredibly, a month after he was asked to resign, Mr. Tarrant writes an op-ed in the Burlington Free Press. What does he do? Does he criticize the administration? Other board members? No. He criticizes Bernie Sanders because I put together a task force to look at the issue, and he criticizes the Burlington Free Press because the Free Press actually did a pretty good job analyzing what was going on. I have always believed and believe today in a single-payer national health care system administered at the statewide level. We can provide health care to every Vermonter, every man, woman, and child without spending a nickel more than we're currently spending, because we spend twice as much per person on health care as any other country in the industrialized world.
Thank you. A response, please?
Sure. Mr. Sanders' answer to health care is let the individual states experiment to see what works. That's the depth of his health care plan. That's why he's ineffective. For 16 years, that's the depth of what he proposes for various things in Washington. Rhetoric. He's got rhetoric for every single issue. He's the best problem pointer out there around. We need to fix these problems. I have real plans for health care in detail. Go to Tarrant06.com and you can see it. There's no detail. There's no substance.
Thank you, Mr.
There's
Tarrant.
no meat.
Would you like a response?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope your plan is better than the work you did on Fletcher Allen. But second of all, what we want to do is build on a very good health care program in the state of Vermont. It is called the Dr. Dinosaur program, which is providing quality health care to the kids in the state of Vermont. Now, if the kids can have that good quality health care, so can their parents. And that's the direction that I would like to go.
Mr. Tarrant, would you like a response?
That's a nothing plan. I'm sorry. You need to think it through. I have a real plan.
I mean, if he thinks the Dr. Dinosaur is a nothing plan, then I urge you to talk to the tens of thousands of parents in this state who think it is a wonderful plan, which is doing a great job for the kids of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Tarrant.
It is a wonderful plan. My point is you just can't take Dr. Dinosaur and run it through every state. You need to think it through. It's way more complex than that.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question comes from Stewart.
Mr. Tarrant, you've said that some degree of outsourcing of jobs is inevitable. Some are going to go overseas. If that is true, what could you do as a new member of the United States Senate to ensure that this state attracts at least as many high-paying jobs?
Sure. The outsourcing issue is real when it affects people locally. We have to be empathetic toward anybody that loses their job or anybody that's about to lose their job. When I started IDX on a shoestring, I never knew from week to week whether I was going to lose my job. And that is that's mental anguish if there ever was one. But there is a global economy. We can't ignore it. We can compete in the global economy. The internet is everywhere. Fact of the matter, what's really happening is every week in this country, we lose 500,000 jobs. Every week. We gain 550,000 jobs, rough numbers. The key is to make sure we in Vermont get our share of those 550,000 jobs. And I'm the largest job creator, the only job creator in this election. Also at IDX, we had a division that trained laid-off workers to work at IDX. We've spun that off, as a separate not-for-profit now, and it is training workers who are laid off to go into new businesses. That is the key to this. Now, in terms of business, Mr. Sanders burst into an IBM board meeting. We'll never have another big business come here. When he was mayor, he continually harassed General Electric, the largest employer in the city of Burlington. We are not going to have any more businesses think about coming to Vermont with that kind of record for somebody that represents us in Washington.
Mr. Sanders.
Just in terms of IBM and G, that's factually incorrect. But the key point here is outsourcing. That's what your question is. And Mr. Tarrant and I have a very fundamental disagreement. Mr. Tarrant, like the president, thinks the economy is doing just great. I don't. I am concerned that in America in the last 5 years we've lost 2.9 million manufacturing jobs. And friends, we are on the cusp of losing millions of white-collar information technology jobs. Corporations should not be allowed to throw American workers out on the street, move to China, pay people there 30 cents an hour, and bring their profits back into this country.
I have a clarification. I didn't hear what he said in the beginning about IBM and GE.
I said what you said was untrue. I never burst into an IBM meeting, never.
And you never harassed General Electric?
No.
Okay, gentlemen. Mr. Sanders, the next question is for you. You've proposed repealing NAFTA and free trade with China, and have actually made trade reform a top priority. Won't that mean some of the imports that we get now will become more expensive? Therefore, how do you balance retaining jobs with the appeal of low-cost imports?
That's a good question. But the answer, I think, is we have to look at what's happening in our economy today. Mr. Tarrant thinks the economy is doing great. Well, it is. If the millionaires and billionaires, it is. But the middle class is shrinking. And one of the reasons is Mr. Tarrant says, we're creating new jobs. He's right. Of course we are creating new jobs. But as often as not, the new jobs that we are creating pay lower wages than the jobs that we're losing. We are moving from a General Motors economy, good wages, good benefits, to a Walmart economy, low wages, poor benefits. So I believe in trade. Trade is a good thing. But trade has got to benefit the middle class of this country, the working families of this country, not just the CEOs of large corporations. We have a $700 billion trade deficit. This is a serious problem. We've got to rethink our trade policies.
Mr. Sanders, thank you. Mr. Tarrant?
Mr. Sanders said he did not harass General Electric. I have a letter here, Mr. Sanders, from General Electric, addressed to you, dated July 1986. And I'm just going to read one paragraph of it. The last paragraph.
Please, sir.
Pardon me?
Sir, no props, please. Please.
This is a letter that's very pertinent.
You may summarize. No props, please.
What it says is General Electric.
Tarrant.
General Electric wants an apology for Mr. Sanders for his illegal actions, for fomenting public opinion against them, and it was signed by 8 General Electric employees, including 3 union leaders. They seem to think you did harass them, and I have the entire record.
Mr. Sanders, a chance to respond.
Some may remember that during the 1980s there was conflict in the state. GM was making Gatling submachine guns. There were a lot of protesters who wanted to shut GE down. And I was in the middle saying, yes, protesters have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights. But at the same time, of course, General Electric has the right to do business in Burlington. That was a very controversial time. And as a mayor, I was in the middle, and I did my best to work with both groups. Some of them, both groups, by the way, were angry at me.
Mr. Tarrant, would you like a response?
No.
Okay. The next question will come from Tom Halleck.
Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Tarrant, you both say that you favor aggressive action to combat global warming. Put this in terms that we can understand, if you would. Help us. What should Americans be prepared to forego to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and what kind of sacrifices do we need to make to become more energy independent?
Sure. Global warming is a real issue, and it's something that we have to address. You know, I like Senator Jeffords' proposed bill, and as a U.S. Senator, I would also want to usher that through. I believe America should take the lead in bringing other countries to Kyoto. We need to continually pursue all kinds of alternative energies. We have to work very hard at it. The fact of the matter is, though, I'm very concerned about whether we are going to be able to get off fossil fuels in time to really make a difference in this global warming issue. I have a great concern about that.
Mr. Sanders?
Of course, global warming is a huge issue, and if we don't address it, God only knows what the future of this planet will be. I'm very proud that in this campaign I have the support of League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, that I have one of the strongest pro-environmental voting records in the United States Congress. Clearly what we have to do is push energy efficiency. It is absurd that we are driving vehicles today that get worse mileage per gallon than 20 years ago. There is technology out there in terms of hydrogen, wind, solar, biofuels that can move us in a very substantial way off of fossil fuels.
Stuart, the next question.
Well, Congressman, let's talk a little bit about your leadership style. You have long touted how you fight for the poor and middle class, how you're willing to challenge the establishment. Looking ahead, do you think a confrontational style will work well in the United States Senate? And do you think it's important to try to reach out to Republicans to find middle ground?
Let me answer the second part of your question first. Of course I work with Republicans. How do you think we got legislation passed on the floor of the House that would allow for prescription drug reimportation, working with Republicans? How do I make progress in raising consciousness on the trade issue other than working with Republicans? On civil liberties and the need to protect our constitutional rights, we work very closely with Republicans. The issue here is, Stuart, in Washington right now, the real problem is that big money and powerful lobbyists have enormous power. The needs of the middle class, the needs of working families, the needs of the kids, the needs of the elderly are badly heard. So yes, if elected to the United States Senate, I will stand up for the middle class, for working families. I am prepared to take on the big money interests that today have so much sway over virtually every piece of legislation that gets on the floor of the House or the Senate.
Mr. Tarrant?
Yeah, Mr. Sanders will stand up for, will fight for, will push back on all of these issues that we agree are serious issues, but no plans, ineffective. His style to answer the question is combative in many cases, and that's why he's passed 2 bills in 16 years. 2 bills out of 166 that he sponsored. He will say, well, the amendments are where the action is, and I did all these amendments. Well, then why did he spend so much time writing 166 bills? To me, that seems very ineffective.
Mr. Sanders, a response?
160 bills in 16 years is 10 bills a year. That's not all that much, but in fact, that's right. The real action in Congress, for those people who know Congress, is amendments. This congressman, under Republican leadership, has more amendments passed on the floor of the House, including some very significant ones, that had votes cast. That's effectiveness.
Mr. Tarrant?
No comment.
Okay. Mr. Tarrant, if elected, what Senate committee would you want to sit on, and how do you believe that would help Vermont?
I would want to sit on health, education, labor, and pension. Obviously, health care is my strong suit with 35 years experience. I want to get my hands on the health care system. I want to work with congressmen and senators across the aisle to get health care fixed. Healthcare is going to break this country. Healthcare is the largest industry in the largest economy in the history of the universe. It is going to break the middle class, and eventually it's going to break everybody. We need somebody there who knows healthcare system. Both sides of the aisle will welcome me with open arms because they don't have anybody who's really lived it and knows the healthcare system. That's the number one thing. The second thing I will do is be an active recruiter of business. I want to bring business to Vermont to help defray the staggering property taxes. We cannot run this state on the backs of property owners. Mr. Sanders, as I said earlier, is not a friend of business. There is no business, none, zero, that will come to Vermont while Mr. Sanders is an official representative. I can tell you that. I've heard it all over the United States. And without business, our property taxes are going to continue to bury us.
Mr. Sanders?
No business will come to the state of Vermont. What's Governor Douglas doing up there, touting all of the new businesses that are coming to the state of Vermont with me in the United States Congress? And I was mayor of the city of Burlington 8 years. And what Moody's recently stated is Burlington today, after 20 years of progressive rule, which I began in 1981, is today one of the most vibrant business communities in the entire United States of America. In terms of committees, well, I also would like to be on the healthcare committee for the fact that we've got to move toward a national healthcare program that guarantees healthcare to all of our people. I want to be on the Veterans Committee so that our veterans get the promises made to them kept.
The next question comes from Tom Halleck.
Thanks, Stephanie. Mr. Sanders, let me ask you about the war on terror. You have been a vocal opponent of the Patriot Act, which gives police broader powers of investigation to fight terrorism. What would you do now to amend it? And has the U.S. found the right balance between protecting civil liberties and protecting the homeland?
Good question, Tom. Very important question. Look, In my view, terrorism is a huge issue, and I fear very much, as most Americans do, there could be another attack against this country. There's nobody that I know in Congress who is not strong in trying to, A, defend our country, and B, come up with ideas to be effective in fighting terrorism. The question that we have to ask is, can we be successful in protecting the American people and fighting terrorism without undermining the Constitution of the United States of America? Do I believe that without probable cause, the government should be able to go into your library and say, tell me the books that Tom took out, or go to a bookstore, among many other things, without having given any reason as to why somebody thinks that you are a terrorist? We have a president right now, not only with the Patriot Act, but with the military detainee bill, with his signing documents, which says, oh yeah, I'm signing this bill, but by the way, I am not going to enforce this section or that section. We have a president who is doing serious disservice to the Constitution of the United States. So yes, fight terrorism, but do it in a way that respects the Founding Fathers and the great Constitution of this country.
Mr. Tarrant.
Yeah, and you know, this has been something that's been going on in every war that we've ever fought in, the tug of power between the legislative branch and the executive branch, and that's a good thing. That's democracy at work. Mr. Sanders is correct. It's a constitutional issue. We balance security with civil liberties, and it's a constant balance. The nice thing about it is we debate these in public. And we came up with a Patriot Act, and we came up with the Military Commission Act. Some people don't agree, some voted against it. But the fact of the matter is, this democracy works. We debate these things in public, even though we know the enemy is listening, and we get something done.
Thank you. The next question comes from Stuart.
Continuing on the education theme for a moment, Mr. Tarrant, let's talk about the president's much heralded No Child Left Behind. The states state officials have had some difficulties with its implementation, and I'm wondering if you would reform it and what you might do as a new senator to persuade your colleagues to get to that 40% funding level for special education.
Sure, Stuart. I don't believe in any unfunded mandates. I have a question with mandates in general and whether they work. There's some good aspects to them and some not. But what the Department of Education should be doing is looking at new ways to teach kids. And I talk about my plans. I have a plan to do that. Not only a plan, it's actually in action in Milton Middle School. We've recognized for years that all kids don't learn in the classroom the same way. Some kids learn better hands-on. So in Milton Middle School, we put in a program, started in September, where we got about 15 kids that go to what I call homeschool at school. And that's where they can use homeschool technology to proceed at their own rate of pace, their own rate of speed. We believe we will reduce the dropout rate in Milton and then progressively throughout the state by 50%. I am very excited about this plan. After the first month, Milton decided to double the number of kids in this program, homeschool at school. It's a creative way. It's an out-of-box thinking. It's a plan that I've not only been thinking about for a while, but it's actually in place, and I believe that over the next 10 years, this thing will reduce the dropout rate in Vermont by 50%. That's what the Department of Education should be doing. The Tarrant Foundation is pleased to be able to do it, but that's the kind of thing I would encourage the Department of Education to do.
Mr. Sanders?
Well, to answer your question, I voted against final passage of No Child Left Behind because I think it takes away the creativity of some really gifted teachers to teach kids rather than just teaching kids to take a test. Second of all, Bush has significantly underfunded No Child Left Behind, meaning that school districts all over Vermont and America forced to pay higher and higher property taxes. Third of all, you raise special education. You tell me the propriety of giving tax breaks to people who don't need it and then not adequately funding special education, which means that kids are not getting the quality education that they need while property taxes are soaring. If elected to the Senate, I will continue the fight of Senator Jeffords to make sure we have full funding of special ed.
Mr. Sanders, this question is for you. Your opponent has touted his business background as a qualification to represent Vermont in Washington. Do you need a business background to succeed in the Senate?
There's nothing wrong with a business background. I applaud Mr. Tarrant for his business work. We need a combination of different types of background in the United States Senate and the United States Congress. Business background is important. I'm not going to apologize that I have been in public service and was regarded as one of the best mayors in the United States of America, helped revitalize the city. I'm not going to apologize for being in the United States Congress, for having 100% voting record, for working people having one of the strongest environmental records, one of the strongest women's records. standing up to Bush, who wants to privatize Social Security. I don't think being in politics is a bad thing. In fact, I want to encourage more of our young people to get involved in the political process. But certainly, we need a combination of backgrounds, different types of expertise to make Congress do the kinds of things that it should be doing.
Mr. Tarrant?
Yeah, and right now we have in the U.S. Senate 70 full-time career politicians and/or lawyers. 70. We have 5 small business people. Small business people, day in and day out, understand the needs of the average American. We are about problem solving. We are about service. We are about getting things done day in and day out. We need more people that think better, cheaper, faster. That's what small business people think, day in and day out. Better, cheaper, faster. We don't have enough of that kind of thinking. And
Thank
yes,
you, Mr. Tarrant.
May I briefly respond?
Yes.
I don't disagree with what Mr. Tarrant just said, but here is a problem. In the Congress, in the Senate, you know what? A majority of the members of the United States Senate are millionaires. And that's becoming the case in the House. That concerns me very much, that you need so much money to run for office. That is a real problem.
Mr. Tarrant?
well, and in this case, no matter which one of us wins, there'll be another millionaire in the Senate.
Just to set the record straight, my wife wishes it was the case, but it is not the case. Thank you, Mr. Tarrant.
Your pension alone, if your new present value, is worth over $1 million.
Okay, it is now time for closing statements. Each candidate will have a minute and a half, and we held a coin flip, and I believe Mr. Tarrant will begin.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you WPTZ for doing that, WPTZ for doing this. Tonight I want to make a commitment to you, and the commitment I will make is that if you elect me to the United States Senate, I promise to represent you professionally. I promise to represent you with dignity. I will consider both sides of every issue, voting for Democratic as well as Republican issues, whatever is the best. I want to effectively represent Vermonters. My opponent, on the other hand, has been ineffective in representing Vermonters in Washington. He's ineffective when he passes only 2 bills, both of which, by his own admission, were insignificant. He's ineffective when he continues to harass business so that they will not come to Vermont, and votes 92% of the time against business. And he's ineffective in representing Vermonters when he votes against sending condolences to families of troops who were killed or injured in the Gulf War simply because of his disdain for Bush Sr. Is not the way to do things. That is partisan hatred, and that is ineffective. I will be ineffective. I believe in team building. I believe in coming together. And coming together, America can do amazing things if we can come together. Amazing things. I believe that the future is about America and our kids. It is said that the measure of a society is how it is left for the next generation. This election, ladies and gentlemen, is about the next generation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sanders.
Well, Congressman Bernie Sanders is so ineffective. I want to thank the AFL-CIO, the Vermont State Employees Association, the Vermont NEA for endorsing me because of the work that we've done for workers. I want to thank every environmental group in the state of Vermont for endorsing me because I have one of the strongest pro-environmental voting records in the United States Congress. I want to thank the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare for endorsing me because of the strong work we have done with senior citizens in the state, bringing in a commodity supplemental food program which is feeding 4,000 low-income seniors and bringing in money to rebuild senior centers all over the state of Vermont. What this campaign is ultimately about is whether we continue moving in the Bush-Cheney direction of one-party government with Republicans controlling the Senate and the House and the White House, or whether we move in a very different direction in which government finally begins to stand up for the working people of this country, for the middle class of this country. And if elected to the Senate, I will be a leader in moving this country in a very different direction than Bush-Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. We had asked that the audience hold their applause until now. Now is the time to applaud.